I guess the news of the week so far, which was Jakobi Meyers officially.
Tristan Vizcaino.
Oh, Jakobi Meyers officially signing his 1-year RFA tender on Monday. Meyers talked to us last week at minicamp, said that he was going to go back and deliberate with his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, and kind of figure out what his best path forward was, but that they were hoping to maybe hammer out an extension to avoid playing on the tender. It didn't sound like it got close enough to any point where Meyers was going to push off signing the tender. There was also a deadline for June 15th. They could have lowered the salary if he hadn't signed it by then. I don't know if the Patriots would have gone that route in good faith. It's not exactly the way that you have a good faith negotiation, but it was something that they would have in their back pocket at that point in time. Not surprised that Meyers has signed the tender, but looking forward to possibly extending Jakobi Meyers beyond this season. I think it's an interesting conversation to have about his value, not just to the Patriots, but relative to the rest of the league. And we've seen the Christian Kirks of the world and the wide receiver market get a little bit nutty. You especially look at some of the deals that guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Russell Gage, Zay Jones, those are some of those mid-tier wide receivers that signed in the last calendar year here in the 2022 free agency period. They're all getting $8 to $10 million a year in terms of average annual value, somewhere between $12.5 to $20 million of that being guaranteed. A pretty nice payday for Jakobi Meyers to go from a UDFA to making a deal that's worth a total value of potentially $30 million over 3 seasons. But the question is for the Patriots, and that we're going to present here on the show, should the Patriots be interested in signing a long-term extension with Jakobi Meyers that is pushing the $10 million per year mark? Because that's the number, right? That's where his market is going to be. I think that's where Drew Rosenhaus is going to try to get, is that 3 for 30 figure is kind of the ceiling of his market. But at the minimum, he's looking at $20 to $24 million total over a 3-year period. Are you in on that for Jakobi Meyers or not?
What was give me your number again exactly, because you just said a million numbers.
I would say that his floor is 3 for 24. His ceiling is 3 for 30.
So what was the Renfro deal again?
The Renfro deal was over 30. I think he got 3 for 36. I want to say
3 for 36. So here's the thing to me. If you're gonna, so you said 8 to 10 million, like that's a big difference to me. 8 per, yeah, that's probably about right. I do think he still has value.
I got to correct it. The Renfro got 2 for 32.
2 for 32. Okay, so
his number was 16.
So I'll say why I brought that up in a second.
Yeah.
Like to me, Meyers is like the 7 to 8 range. It's like the top end of his range. When you're getting a 10, you're pushing it because the lack of versatility. What kills Jakobi Meyers is his lack of yard after catch ability. Now, if he comes out this year and it turns out the muscle he added makes him much better after the catch, completely different story. The reason I bring up the Renfro deal, though, and I wouldn't do 2 over 32 for Jakobi. I wouldn't. But if you look at the numbers, overall, between Jakobi Meyers and Hunter Renfro, they're actually very comparable, especially when you do it on a per-game basis. However, that's skewed because Jakobi Meyers didn't do a ton his rookie year, but his last 2 years have been pretty much equal. He's been relatively the same player, very consistent.
Yeah.
Hunter Renfro didn't really do much until last year. He had a breakout year. He doubled his catches, nearly doubled his yards. So here's the thing. When you go to the negotiating table, Jakobi Meyers is going to put down, well, here's the numbers over the last 2 years. I am comparable to this player. Yeah. So I deserve comparable money. Whereas the Patriots are going to say, well, let's just look at last year. You're not comparable. And that's going to be the sticking point. And generally the players win those conversations, because some team somewhere is going to buy into, well, Jakobi Meyers has been more consistent and maybe he still has untapped potential. And we like that. I don't think the Patriots would be that team because they're generally not that team. But that's where it gets interesting to me. I look at him, 8 million per year is probably about right. Because again, I think he still does have value, but especially if the Patriots are going to do this whole Shanahan thing on offense, they need guys who can create after the catch. And he's not that kind of receiver. He ceases to be a scheme fit if they're going to go that way. And you're not going to pay somebody that kind of money who is potentially going to get schemed out of your system. So that's where I'm at with Jakobi right now. I think this is a big year for him. I say this all. If you're taking notes on what I'm saying and try to cold take me, write it in pencil. I'm saying this all in pencil. This is all subject to change. But as we sit here today, that's how I feel about it.
I have concerns about extending Jakobi Meyers for too much money because you mentioned the yards after catch. I have the stat right here from Pro Football Focus. I looked up receivers that had over 100 targets last year. So we're talking about high volume guys, right? 100 plus targets. There was 37 of them. And yards after catch per reception on average, Jakobi Meyers was 36th out of 37 receivers in yards after catch per reception. And yards per route run, so just taking the amount of routes that he ran divided it by yards, he was 31st out of 37 in that high volume category. So it's very clear to me that Meyers is not a high volume guy. Is he a nice slot receiver? Is he maybe somebody that is better used or better suited in a good offense to the amount of targets that, let's say, Danny Amendola used to get as kind of that predominant slot guy, but not the full-time Z receiver that was Julian Edelman, right? Amendola was sort of that secondary option inside. Is he a useful player in that role? I think so. But I think in terms of him being a 100-plus target guy for your offense, what the stats show you is that he is one of the least efficient high-volume guys in the entire NFL in terms of how much yards he actually puts out relative to the targets and the receptions that he gets. It's a role that has inherently, for 20-plus years, just put out all sorts of production, from Troy Brown to Deion Branch to Welker to Edelman, now to Meyers. You play the slot in New England, you're going to catch 80-plus balls, you're going to have over 800 yards, and you're going to push 1,000. Like, that's just – you show up and that's what's going to happen. I think they can get better players inside than Jakobi Meyers. And if I'm Jakobi Meyers, I want to get this done before the start of the season, because I look at some of the other weapons that they now have in their offense. Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, if Trey Nixon makes this football team, getting more targets for guys like Hunter Henry and Johnny Smith. Is he going to have the same target share that he had last year? Is he going to have 126 targets again next year with all these guys in their second seasons with the Patriots, or guys that they're going to try to implement now? I think there's going to be less opportunity for Jakobi Meyers in this offense as well this year. So if I'm Jakobi, like you said, you put down that Hunter Renfrow contract. I think Russell Gage got from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 3 over 30 with $20 million guaranteed. That's a nice deal to sort of work off of. His production has been better than Gage's. It was better last year than Russell Gage's was, but they're comparable level players. If I'm Meyers, I'm trying to get the Patriots to give me that deal now. If I'm the Patriots, I'm more than content in letting him play for $4 million this year. I think that's the way that they're going to end up going, because, like I said, everybody kind of expects him to have an even better season than last year. I think the targets are going to go elsewhere, right? I think Bourne's going to see more targets. Parker's certainly going to be now involved in the offense. I think his numbers are going to take a dip, and then he's going to take a dip in the wallet when he tries to negotiate a contract next offseason. I like Jakobi Meyers. He's done everything right. He's worked hard. He's the consummate Patriot way type player, right? UDFA, right. Carves out a role, becomes a starter, but I'm not sure that he's ever going to maximize that role any more than he already has. Is he going to ever be better than this with the athletic profile and with the yard after catch profile that he has? Like, he's not going to all of a sudden become a much better athlete that can get in and out of contact and create explosive plays and run after the catch, right? I just don't know if he's ever going to be that type of guy. And at this point, you probably would have seen more of a feel and stuff like that of that happening.
Yeah, the other thing I would say too, this isn't exactly how things work, but let's do a fun little thought exercise here.
Yeah.
The Patriots have, the thing with the Patriots receiver core right now, and there's positives and negatives to this. They have a bunch of number twos, right? They've got a bunch of supporting, role players. They don't have that star wide receiver. And maybe they'll make that work, but you kind of look at, okay, how's the roster going to evolve? And you budget X amount of money for the wide receiver position. If Meyers is $4 million right now. Let's say that just comes off the books next year. Then you have Nelson Aguilar at $14 million. That comes off the book. Would you rather give, so that's $18 million you have to play with, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you give 10 of that to Jakobi Meyers at wide receiver. What are you really getting with 8, right? Versus you could have $18 million worth of wide receiver money coming off the books. What does an $18 million wide receiver look like? I mean, I'm just looking at it right here.
Well, now it looks like Christian Kirk, so that could be a problem. But other than that, it's...
Well, no, Brandon Cooks got 19.8.
Right, yeah.
Amari Cooper got 20 if you stretch a little bit. That's a low-end number one, but that's a number one.
Yeah.
So, also, I think teams realize Christian Kirk's absurd. Yeah. I think that's its own thing, right? Heck, Allen Robinson got 15.5.
Yeah.
So you're kind of in the right ballpark there. If you take Aguilar and Meyers out, if you let those guys walk and you put that money into one receiver, that's a legitimate upgrade.
Yeah. That's sort of how I feel about it. I just would be wary of giving Jakobi Meyers anything over $8 million a year. I think if they're willing to have a hometown discount of some sort and he's willing to take a little bit less to stay in New England, then that's a different animal. But if he's going to try to cash out, as he rightfully should, I'm not saying he shouldn't go out and try to get all the money that he possibly can. But if he's going to go that route, I would probably let some other team pay him if he's going to get $8, $9, $10 million a year on the free agent market. You mentioned some other, use that $18 million and kind of resurface it to somebody else. Look, I'll continue to say it. If Washington's shopping Terry McLaurin, that's the guy, right? Those are the types of guys that you would love to see New England try to get their hands on and maybe reallocate some of those resources from Meyers and Aguilar and even Parker, I think, has an out if it doesn't work out, or if they want to try to free up even more money at wide receiver. They got plenty of money next offseason, so that's not a problem, right? That's going to be easy to do next offseason. So we'll see what happens there.